Baruchim Habayim. Welcome to our chapter 4.3 video. That is the third video about chapter 4, in which we will talk about the definite article and conjunctions in Hebrew. The definite article means the, and a conjunction can be lots of different things, but today we're going to be learning the main conjunction in Hebrew, and that is the word and. So that is our topic for today. But before we get to that, do you remember this? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. This is Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the first verse in the Bible, and it starts with Bereshit, which means in the beginning. Bara Elohim means created God. In Hebrew, the subject, the thing that does the verb, that does the action described by the verb, comes after the verb. This is different than in English. So in English, we would say God created. In Hebrew, we would say created, and then we would say God. They would understand that the subject of the verb comes after it. So in the beginning, God created et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Hashamayim means the heavens. Shamayim means heavens. Hashamayim means the heavens. Ve'et haaretz, eight, which occurs also here, doesn't really mean anything. We'll get to eight later, but it really just means what's coming next is the object of the verb. So create, here is the verb. God created. What did God create? Hashamayim. Ve'et haaretz. Eretz means land. Haaretz means the land, the heavens and the land or the earth. And va here means and. Va. So about this highlighted form, Bereshit, we know it means in the beginning. You might remember that Rosh, Resh, Aleph, Shin is a root there. That's the root of that word, and that root means to be on top, or kind of the head of something, at the very top of something. Ba means in. Elohim, you might remember this word, meaning God. It's in the plural form, but that's because ancient Israel referred to its God in the plural, Elohim. And Hashamayim, the heavens. Shamayim meaning sky or heaven. Meaning it a little bit differently than Christians mean heaven, as in the place where you go when you die and so on. That's not exactly what Shamayim means. It really means the skies. What's up there, whatever that blue stuff is up there that they didn't really know about very much. And then the, we said this means and. And then haaretz. Eretz means land. Haaretz means the land. So we just learned three new things. The word the definite article, is prefixed. Haaretz. It gets stuck on to your word. If the word that you have is, say, shamayim, which means the skies or the heavens, if you want to say the skies, you add ha to it. It's prefixed. Also, the word in or at, ba, is like in the beginning, ba, reshit, in the beginning. Reshit means beginning, ba reshit means in the beginning. It's also prefixed. You stick it on to the front of whatever word you want to describe with it. So, in the house, ba, by it, ba. You just add it on, you stick it right on there. Kind of like a Lego piece. You build these words by adding different beginnings and endings to them. And then the word and, va. It's just a vav with a schwa underneath it. That is the conjunction. That means and, va. So if I want to say horses and mares, I would say sus va susa. Or susim va susot. Susim, the masculine plural for horses. Va susot, and mares. So let's take a look at the following here. This word on the left, the top word, melech. We have our stress marker, so it's melech. This is our final form kaf with a schwa in there. They'll just do this with final form kafs just to make sure you don't add something else in there. You'll understand this a lot better in a couple weeks, but just for now, you don't say anything differently. It's just melech. That's the word for a king. Navi. This is the word for a prophet. But if I want to make that the king, not just any king, right? Not a king in general, but the king, the one who is king right now, I will add a hey and a patach underneath that, our short A-class vowel, and I will also add a dagesh into the first letter of my word. Think of it as building something onto the word. So in English, the definite article, is independent of it's its own word, right? We just add another word beyond, we change for the, but it's beyond the noun that it's describing. So a king, the king. But in Hebrew, we actually add something to the word itself. Hamelech, the king. So if I want to say the prophet, a prophet is Navi, the prophet would be, try to figure it out, what would it be? Ha-Navi. Hey, patak dagesh. A prophet, Navi. The prophet, Ha-Navi. Huh? So, hey, patak, and then a dagesh in the first letter of the following word. That is how you write the definite article in Hebrew. So, melech, a king. Ha-Melech, the king. So, if we are looking at these words right here, ish, meaning man, ir, meaning city, rosh, meaning head. If we wanted to add the definite article to this, we would say ha-ish, but we have a problem here. That problem is that gutturals are strong, and they do not take dageshes. Gutturals are interesting letters. Remember, they take that sneaky patak sometimes. Remember, they take their own kind of composite schwas. They kind of get what they want, and they don't like it when dageshes come near them. Now, there's a real reason why this exists, why this is a rule, and it's because you can't double a guttural sound very easily at all. Imagine trying to make two of those aleph sounds. It would be pretty strange. So we don't actually do that. So what's wrong with this form is that gutturals do not take dageshes, and resh doesn't either. Resh is a sometimes guttural. So aleph, ayin, hey, chet, and resh don't take dageshes. They reject them, in fact. Gutturals prefer A-class vowels. They never take a simple vocal schwa. They always take those composite schwa things, and they never take dageshes. A resh does not take a dagesh. So instead, look what happens. What happens is we actually get a longer vowel underneath our hey, the beginning of our definite article. Instead, the vowel got longer. Instead of repeating the guttural consonant, which is kind of impossible, the person who's speaking just hangs on to the vowel a little bit longer. So instead of ha-ish, it's ha-ish. We call that compensatory lengthening. That is, the vowel got longer to compensate for the fact that there's no doubled consonant. So, hey patak dagesh is the pattern for the definite article. Sometimes you'll run into letters that don't work with that formula because they can't take a dagesh. That's the gutturals. So they will compensatorily lengthen sometimes. You'll come across a longer vowel. You can still note, the point is that you'll still recognize that vocabulary word. Ish means man. So ha-ish means the man. You won't even notice that there's compensatory lengthening in a few weeks. But for now, you might say, well, that's not a patak underneath my hey. That can't be the definite article. Well, it is. It's just compensatory lengthening because you don't have a dagesh in your first letter of your word, because there's a guttural and it rejected the dagesh. So for Ir, the city, same exact thing. Ha-Ir, the city, notice it's hey, comets, and then the word. It's still a hey stuck onto your word. It's pretty clear that's the definite article, but nonetheless, you may be confused by the form. For rosh, another a guttural there. I mean, resh is a kind of partly guttural, but resh does not take dageshes, and here takes compensatory lengthening instead of taking the full definite article. These are also interesting. Take a look at these. Heys and chets also don't take dageshes, but guess what? They act in a slightly different way with how they compensate for the loss of the dagesh. So palace is the word heichal. It actually means temple as well. The temple in Jerusalem is called the heichal, and it's God's temple, God's palace, right? The temple is built kind of like a house. The Holy of Holies, that's God's bedroom. Other cultures around Israel also built their temples in exactly the same way with Holy of Holies and so on. So it was God's palace, the temple. So heichal means temple and palace. And if we wanted to say the palace, we would say ha-hechal. Hechal means palace. The palace is ha-hechal. That sounds a lot like the same thing I'd say for, ish means man, ha-ish, right, is the man. But here we can see that there is a hey and a patak, but no dagesh, right? You can't put a dagesh in a hey. It's a guttural. But you also don't compensatorily lengthen here. There is the same vowel that you had before underneath your hey. Notice it's your patak here. That's just the way this works. Heys and chetz tend to take what's called, and chodesh means new moon. So ha-chodesh is the new moon. Heys and chetz tend to get what's called virtual doubling. This is a terrible use of the word virtual. If I could change this, I could. It just means the dot goes away. The dagesh just goes away. It vanishes, and nothing happens. Virtual doubling meaning the dagesh would double the first letter of the word, right? But here, it's doubling it virtually. So instead of just, what happens here is the dagesh gets rejected and goes away. That's it. So you have these different possibilities. Now, you don't need to remember which word does which thing. You don't need to remember that alephes and ayins and reshas tend to compensatorily lengthen, and that heys and chetz tend to virtually double. You don't need to memorize that or remember that. All you need to do is recognize that if you know a vocab word and there's a hey and a patak or a hey and a comments that's added to the front of it, that's the definite article. It's saying the. That's what you need to recognize and remember here. And if you like learning these rules, there's a lot more to teach you. But so here's another a possibility. There can be a hey with a segel. These are heys and ayins and chetz as the first letter of these words. They don't like taking the dagesh. And also, for some reason, they take a segel underneath it. But again, if you know that the word, say, hamon, that word on top, hamon, means uproar, which it's not a common word, but it's a word that takes this kind of definite article. Hamon means uproar. If you memorize that and you know that, and then you see heh in front of it, you might be a little puzzled as to why it isn't ha. Hey patak dagesh is the definite article in Hebrew, what you'll almost always see. But for these exceptions, you'll see sometimes this hey and segel. And these are rare, but they happen. So that second word there, avon. Avon means iniquity. So sin is another way to say this, the iniquity of the people or something. If you want to say the iniquity of the people, you'd say ha-avon, the iniquity. Or chazon, at the very bottom there, the vision, like a prophet would have a vision. Chazon, ha-chazon, it means the vision. So ha-chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah. Okay, so we can summarize these rules as following. The definite article is hey patak dagesh. It may appear as hey and segel when it's followed by some of these other types of gutturals, especially gutturals that have a long a underneath them, comments underneath them. Now, why does this happen? I don't know. I'm sure that there are some linguists that do some work on comparative phonology and know the reason why this happens, but it kind of doesn't matter to me. What matters is that sometimes the definite article will show up in slightly different forms. So let's just practice this a little bit. So if we look at this first word here, prince, right? Sar, prince, chief, leader, whatever. There's a lot of different ways to translate this, but for now, like a chief or a prince or a lord. Sar, if we want to say the prince, we would say ha-sar, hey patak dagesh. People, the word for people in Hebrew is am, like the people of Israel, ha'am. Ha'am. Ha'am Yisrael, the people of Israel. Ha'am. Notice that it's a hey and a comments here because our first letter of our word that we're adding the definite article to is a guttural and cannot take the dagesh. So sar means prince. Ha-sar means the prince. Am means people. Ha'am means the people. I actually don't pronounce it any differently this way, really. And then next, bayit means house. Bayit means house. If I want to say the house, I'd say ha-bayit. Now notice bayit already had a dagesh in it. That was a dagesh lene, a weak dagesh. It just was telling you it was turning a stop into a aspirant into a stop. But instead, now it's going to be a dagesh forte. It's going to be doubling it. Now, that doesn't matter. You don't need to necessarily know that. But just to say, the dagesh got stronger there. And then underneath that, derech, the road, a road, derech. It can be used metaphorically, like the way of God, the road of God, and so on. So if I want to say the road, I would say haderech. Lastly, ozen means ear. Remember, oznaim is how you'd say 2 ears. Oznaim. I've got 2 of them, right? But if I want to say the ear, I would say ha'ozen. It's a hey with a comments underneath it because it can't take the dagesh, that aleph can't take the dagesh, so it compensatorily lengthens. So this next slide here, choshek means darkness. If I want to say the darkness, I would say ha-choshek. Or chatat means sin. It means literally to miss something, but by the time of the Bible, it means almost exclusively like the technical term of sinning. Chatat. Chatat. If I want to say the sin, or the sin offering, the thing that takes away your sin, which is the same word, amazing, it's chatat. So chatat means sin or sin offering, and chatat means the sin or the sin offering. Lastly there, Lila means night. You might have heard an Eric Clapton song called Layla, or know someone with a name Layla. That comes from the Hebrew word for night. So Lila is night. And if I want to say the night, I'd say halala. Lila, halala. There's hey, patak, and dagesh. So that is the definite article. Now I want to tell you something else, and this is the conjunction. So Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 2 begins, Va-ha-aretz, God created the heavens and the earth and the land. And then we get to the stuff about tovu, vavohu, was chaos and formless and waste, or welter, or whatever it is. But so here, Va-ha-aretz. And so the main word here is aretz, right? Or eretz, meaning land. Ha-aretz is the land. Va-ha-aretz is and the land, or and the earth. At the beginning of the word, vav is almost always a conjunction. Vav doesn't often occur at the beginning of words. It's actually very rare, unless you're looking at the conjunction and. It can mean some other stuff. The definite article can sometimes mean some other stuff too, but for now, just translate ha as the and translate vav on the front of a word as and. So at the beginning of a word, added to a word you already know, vav is a conjunction. So here is Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. V'ha'aretz hayata tohu vavohu. That's that first line I just read up here. V'ha'aretz hayata tohu vavohu. This is by nonsense, by the way. Tohu kind of means like welter or like waste, like chaos. But vohu doesn't really mean anything. It's just like a nonsense rhyming. It's like the whole world was chaos and beas or something. So v'ha'aretz hayata means was, and the land was tohu vavohu. V'choshek, and darkness, al paneh, was upon the face of tahom, the deep. V'ruach, and now if you remember, ruch was that kind of word, but it has the sneaky patak here. Ruach, so the spirit or the wind, Elohim of God, the spirit of God, merachefet, fluttered or hovered, al paneh hamayim, upon the face of mayim means water, but hamayim is the water. So where are the conjunctions here? There's actually a few. There's 3, one starting each of these first 3 lines, but then there's also this one right here, tohu vavohu. Va. And the earth was welter and waste, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering above the waters. So there's one really strange way that the conjunction can show up from time to time, and that is this. Sometimes it shows up as a shurek. Remember that long U vowel? So instead of b'nei Yisrael, and by the way, b'nei Yisrael means the Israelites, the sons of Israel, quite literally, but sons of is often used in ancient Hebrew to talk about members of a class. It has nothing to do with gender when it's used like this. So Evan is how to say rock in Hebrew, and b'nei avnim is how you say pebbles. Sons of stone are pebbles. They don't think those are boys or something. So B'nai Yisrael is often translated sons of Israel, but when it's used like that, it doesn't. It's inclusive. It means all the Israelites. So I translate this as the Israelite children or the Israelites. I mean, that's really what it means. So in any event, when you see this, it's not v'bnei Yisrael and the children of Israel. It's u'vnei Yisrael. It's because of that bait. This is a little rule that we'll talk about in just a minute. This vav turns into a shurek sometimes when we have certain kinds of consonants. So when you stick va, that vav, that conjunction, when you stick it onto the beginning of certain words with certain consonants, it becomes hard to say. V'bnei Yisrael. Especially this one here. It would be v'bnei Yisrael, because that's a bait without a dagesh in it. So v'bnei Yisrael just is hard to say. So they end up using that vav in another way that they know how to use it, and that's by turning it into a helper vowel. So that it turns into an u. So if this conjunction is followed by a bait, a mem, or a pei, notice those things all have to do with kind of your mouth coming together, making like a b, p, ma, right? If you try to make those sounds, and you'll feel your lips coming together. Or a consonant with a vocal schwa, so Shemuel. Shemuel starts with the vocal schwa, that's the name Samuel, Shemuel. Then the vav will appear as a shorek. This is called the bump schwa rule. Bump because bait, mem, and pei, bump, right? I'm just sounding out those three letters to which this occurs. Bump, and then schwa, because if it's a vocal schwa starting a word, it'll show up as this shurek. So bump schwa. You don't need to know this, by the way, the bump schwa. But you just need to recognize that sometimes a vav, meaning and, shows up in front of words and will show up as a shurek. This is also strange because remember what we can't start consonants with in Hebrew? Can't start them with vowels, right? But this one does. U'vnei Yisrael. This is the only time in Hebrew that this rule gets broken. Literally the only time is this shorek that'll show up as the conjunction. And it just shows up because it's hard to say it any other way. So that's another way to spot it, is that if you start a word with a consonant, that's a form of the word and. So, uvayit. Uvayit, and a house. Or umelech. It's not v'melech. It's going to be umelech because it's bump schwa, bump, the melech. So it's not v'melech. Even try to say v'melech. Just try to say v'melech. It's hard to say. So umelech is a lot easier to say. And that means and a king. Upari, and a fruit. The word pari means fruit. So there's your bumapa, right? The examples, bayit, melech, pari, bumapa, that's bump. And then a vocal schwa here. Devarim, meaning words. Udevarim, and words. Remember, davar means word. Devarim is the plural form. I added the im to the end of it, and I made and words. So here's another example here. And a dream. V'chalom. I have a composite schwa here. Do you see that composite schwa underneath the chet? Because chets, they like those A-class vowels and they like those composite schwas. So they're going to take it. And then you know what they do? They add it to the conjunction. Now this is a slide that looks very long and there's lots of rules here. You do not need to memorize these rules. I'll say that again. You do not need to memorize this page. Some people really like to know the rules. If you like knowing the rules, if that helps you to learn Hebrew, then this page is for you. And what it's showing you are the rules for how the conjunction changes. The vowel under the conjunction, which is usually a schwa. We just said sometimes it turns into a shorek when you have bump schwa. And then sometimes the vowel underneath your conjunction, your vav conjunction, will change to something else, like an A-class vowel, like a patak or a kamet. Sometimes it'll change to a segel. That's because it's being forced to do that by the vowel that follows it, the vowel under the first consonant of the word that you're adding the conjunction to. So you don't need to know this, but you will sometimes see a vav added to a word you know with some sort of strange vowel underneath it. And that's okay. It still means and. So therefore, chalom, which means dream, plus vav, is going to be vachalom. Okay. Conjunction means and. Definite article means the. We have some more things to talk about both of those things in a little bit, but we will come back to that. We also have a little bit about reading because this is the week we start translation. So I'll talk a little bit about how to read Hebrew in the next video, and then after that I'll have like a sample video of trying to help you work through the translation homework for the first time. Hope this isn't overwhelming or too much, but just think about all that you've learned so far in just the span of a few weeks. You have learned so much and can read so much Hebrew. Definitely try to hold on to that feeling and remember that and let it encourage you today.